decided that I wanted to do a live reading like this today because although you guys can't see me, I want you all to hear in the background to a certain extent, at least for a little bit. I'm going to try to attempt to do this too as well once my 12-year-old gets home from school. But sometimes I have so many things to do. And then, of course, I run a tax business as well. And right now is a very busy season. And I want people to know that although you may have a lot of things to do, it shouldn't be an excuse to avoid taking the time to read. One of my first suggestions, in many of my videos I talk about it, but one of my many suggestions is to always read aloud. And it doesn't matter what's going on around you, just read aloud. Because if you read aloud, not only does that sound, in my opinion, my point of view, that sound bounces back to you, but also the good thing about reading aloud as well is that your children hear you also in the background. So that's one of the reasons why I say it's good to read aloud. Then it always keeps the focus of your children too as well. If you have a 1-year-old like me, they listen to you read and process reading, and then they're able to pick up on words a little bit faster. So that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this live today this way. So I welcome you all. I am Pavi LG, your host. Today we are doing a reading out of one of the many of books that I read all at once, and this is Beyond the River by Anne Hagedorn, the untold story of the heroes of the Underground Railroad. We are picking up in chapter 12. I'm picking up in chapter 12 because I read a couple of chapters out of one book, and I go into another book, and I do that all throughout the day. So chapter 12, if you ever pick up this book, we're going to pick up from there. So you'll have to read the first 11 chapters, but we're picking up in chapter 12 here for this live video. And every once in a blue moon, I'll go mute and then I'll come back and continue to read because I have a 1-year-old in the background watching cartoons. So chapter 12, the 70 is the chapter, the 70. So the American Anti-Slavery Society called them the 70. Their teacher was Theodore Weld. Their style was modeled after the evangelistic agitation of the Great Revival. Their goal was to convert the congregations of the North to take a stand against slavery. Okay, named after the 70 men sent out by the apostles to convert the world to Christianity, this 70 consisted of agents of the Anti-Slavery Society traveling to rural communities of the North and using the methods of religious revivalism to persuade the masses to support immediate emancipation and to launch anti-slavery societies. The society appointed Weld to select the members of this elite group. Henry B. Stanton, a fellow Lane rebel, and John Greenleaf Whittier, the poet and abolitionist, assisted him. Many of the anointed agents were students from various seminaries. Several were experienced ministers, including John Rankin, who was invited to join on July 6, 1836. In the 70s, the anti-slavery agitation was manifesting its religious roots. Rankin, having preached anti-slavery reform only through the church for the past 20 years, was eager to serve. But his congregation was skeptical. Indeed, the appointment would take him away from his church for 1 year, and already his speaking engagements and duties at Ripley College had stolen Rankin from his church for weeks at a time. Members expressed concern that his absence might cause a division within the church between those who supported him and those who did not. They worried, too, about the dangers he might encounter at a time when the mob spirit raged so fiercely. Stories abounded about violence inflicted on anti-slavery speakers in recent months. One Lane rebel was driven from a town by farmers with buggy whips. Another was dragged from his bed, stripped naked, tarred, feathered, and dumped 10 miles outside of town where he had spoken the night before. Stones, eggs, even shards of glass were thrown in the faces of touring abolitionists. Some in Rankin's congregation feared he would be maimed or even killed. In the end, after much debate, they voted unanimously to allow Rankin to labor in behalf of the poor slave for 1 year. And so in August, at a time when mobs were still running roughshod over Cincinnati, he took to the road. We shall pause and return in less than 1 minute. Okay, we have returned. Picking up, the society paid him $500 for the year plus travel expenses. It gave him total freedom to choose where he went within the boundaries of the state of Ohio. Though it advised that agents confer with local abolitionists before making any decisions about how to proceed locally, it asked him to send donations to the society's treasurer in New York as soon as he collected them. If he formed a new anti-slavery society, he was to end the list of members and officers immediately to the Secretary of the National Society. The society required that he write reports about his experiences and progress in organizing new societies, all to be published in their organ, the Emancipator, and republished in other newspapers nationwide. And it asked that he seek an exchange between local editors and the Emancipator. Rankin began his agency particularly desirous to obtain collections for the anti-slavery cause. The Emancipator wrote on September 29th, even before leaving home, he gathered $22.50 at Ripley on August 1st to be used for the replacement of Bernie's philanthropist press. At his initial stop in Sardinia, he lectured for several days and received $221 in payments and pledges. Now, at nearly every stop, Rankin heightened to the passions of both the friends and foes of slavery. Though a lean man of average height with narrow shoulders and a delicate structure, and though plagued for years with insecurities about his public speaking, he was now a powerhouse. After his lectures at Grassy Run, at Yankee Settlement, at Beech Grove, all small Ohio towns, he inspired dozens of people to sit down on the very day of his talk to organize their new anti-slavery societies. At Winchester and West Union, both in Adams County, he encountered formidable mobs, though he enlisted 48 new members to existing societies. At West Union, many of the horses outside the church were bobbed while Rankin was speaking. Having had more than one horse shared of its mane and tail, Rankin had locked his own horse in a stable at the other end of the town. At Winchester, a man sodden with whiskey pushed his way to the front of the audience and tried to strike Rankin with a club. And as Rankin left the town, he was deluged in with eggs from equally drunken pro-slavers. We will pick up in just less than 1 minute. Please stand by. All right, in Claremont County, Rankin discovered many fans of his letters. The mobcrats have as yet been unable to get up a mob in this country, in this county. We are on page 115 of Beyond the River. Rankin wrote in the Emancipator. However, in Batavia, the Claremont County seat, a small gang of young men had thrown eggs and rocks at him through a window as he lectured. He never skipped a word of his talk, but the audience fled before he completed it. At Felicity, in the same county, the elders of the Cincinnati Presbytery, which was coincidentally meeting there at the same time, prohibited Rankin from preaching at the local Presbyterian church. This was particularly upsetting because his brother Alexander was the pastor of the church. Rankin had even helped to build it. Upon hearing that the leadership of the church had turned one of their own preachers away, the elders of the local Methodist church voted unanimously to open their doors to him. And on the night of his lecture, there was standing room only as the entire Methodist congregation and some members of the Presbyterian church attended. An anti-slavery society was formed that night with a beginning roster of 60 members. At Williamsburg, also in Clermont County, the local Presbyterian minister preceded Rankin's talk with a proclamation that Rankin's views would lead to war and bloodshed. The audience was silent as Rankin walked up the aisle of the crowded church to the pulpit. Throughout the lecture and afterward, there was barely a nod of the head, and Rankin couldn't judge the response except to believe it was a total rejection. Later, on the road from the church to the house where Rankin was staying, a man came out of the bushes and struck him with a club, hitting him hard in the neck. It was unseasonably cold that night, and Rankin had worn layers of clothes that protected his neck enough so that bruises and soreness were the worst of his injuries. After leaving the town, he learned that not only had the lecture been a success, but a few of the townsfolk were planning to start a society. And soon there were safe houses for the Underground Railroad in the town of Williamsburg. His worst threat in Clermont County occurred in the town of Withamsville, where two rowdy young men followed him after his lecture at a school and threw firebrands at him from the school stove. He was struck on the shoulder, but not seriously injured. Shortly after that, in a letter to one of his sons, he confessed that at times on his tour, he was tempted to believe that there were men of his own race who did not seem fit to be free. I apologize. By early September, Rankin had delivered 26 lectures and was pleased with the response he was getting. At one point in the tour, he formed 3 new societies on 3 consecutive days. His audiences were larger than he had experienced, and he felt that they were more deeply interested in the subject than ever before. I have reason to believe, he says, I have reason to believe that I have succeeded in bringing the larger part of all who have heard me to favor our views, end quote. He wrote on September 6 in the anti-slavery newspaper, The Advocate of Freedom, out of Augusta, Maine. The larger part of opposition is occasioned by the slander circulated about us, he went on to say. We will return in less than 1 minute. Okay, we are continuing. Where I ended off was the larger part of opposition is occasioned by the slander circulated about us, he went on to say, page 116 out of Beyond the River. When the people come to hear for themselves, they readily embrace the truth. I have as yet delivered but 2 lectures in a place. I first discussed the question, quote, what business have the people of the free states to interfere with slavery, end quote, and answer the common objections of opposers. I next present the Bible, view of the subject, and bring divine truth to bear upon the conscience. This produces a most powerful effect. I have seldom seen audiences as much moved under any other subject. It is common for opposers to renounce immediately. The system of slavery was founded, and it now stands upon a false interpretation of the scriptures, and the blood of it lies peculiarly upon the gospel ministry. Let the foul strain be washed from the sacred page, and let the effulgence of divine truth be poured upon all the churches, and the bands of wickedness shall be broken, and the oppressed shall go free. Now, it goes on to say, if he knew it in advance that his audience consisted of more than the usual numbers of Southern sympathizers, he sometimes began with a slightly different approach, proclaiming his belief in the Declaration of Independence and reiterating its opening passages. This, as he well knew, was not a point of contention for anyone in his audiences. Then he stated that God created all men of one blood, which also brought little or no disagreement. a point usually acceptable on biblical grounds. We will return in less than 1 minute. Okay, I am back. And so, where I'm going to pick up off of, I'm here on page 116 out of Beyond the River. Then he stated that God created all men of one blood, which also brought little or no disagreement, a point usually acceptable on biblical grounds. Then he made the point that men should either do their own work or pay someone else to do it. No one disagreed. By this time, his audience was held in suspense, the anti-slavers wondering what his point would be, and the Southern sympathizers waiting and waiting for the fanaticism to kick in. He concluded his introduction by making the point that these three principles were the cornerstones of the abolitionist belief that all men, regardless of color, held the same God-given rights. And then he launched into the evils of slavery. On the first Monday of October, Rankin returned home to accompany Lowry to Lane Seminary and help him settle in. Lowry had intended to enter a seminary in Andover, Massachusetts, but the Rankins' financial situation was unstable that year. Lane was far less expensive, and Lowry had been promised a job doing carpentry to pay his board. Rankin stayed at the home of a friend who was the editor of the Cincinnati Journal, while Lowry went on to the school to enroll and to find a room. The next day, he and Lowry met with Calvin Stowe, a Lane professor and husband of Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Lyman Beecher to discuss Lowry's course of study. Though he was only 20 years old, Lowry's studies and preparatory work allowed him to enter the junior class. Benjamin Templeton, the black man Rankin had tutored in his home, had just finished his studies at Hanover College and was enrolling as a Lane senior at the same time. Rankin asked his son to look after Templeton. His anticipated presence had already disturbed at least one faculty member and the head custodian of the school, who told Lowry, quote, "I am not here to wait on a nigger," end quote. Templeton, who would come a few weeks later, would take the room across the hall from Lowry. Satisfied that his own son was off to a good start, Rankin resummed his tour. Within a month of his father's departure, Lowry received a note from a messenger asking that he report as soon as possible to the anti-slavery office in Cincinnati. His first thought was that something violent might have happened to his father on the tour, and so he sprinted the full 2 miles from his room to the office. On arriving, he was informed that there was a runaway slave hidden in the town's free black community and that a reward of $500 had been offered for his capture. Several parties were hunting him down, and it was no longer safe to keep him in the city. He must be moved as soon as possible to the home of a Quaker, William Buttersworth, 25 miles from the city. The people who ran the local anti-slavery society assumed Lowry had experience with such risk-taking ventures. Would he be willing to go? Lowry agreed, as long as they furnished him with the horses and detailed directions. He left at 8 that October evening, and after delivering the fugitive safely into the hands of Mr. Butterworth, he returned the horses, walked the 2 miles back to the seminary, and was in bed just before dawn. No one, not even Templeton, knew of his absence that night. Throughout his years at Lane, Lowry would continue to answer the calls of the Anti-Slavery Society, spending a night and sometimes a day and a night escorting a runaway slave to a safe haven somewhere to the north. If Mr. Butterworth was not the host, it was Thomas Hibben in the town of Wilmington, 60 or so miles away, or Abraham Allen, whose home was 5 miles farther than Hibben's. Usually, Lowry could steal away for the night and not be seen, though the trips to Wilmington and beyond required more than a day there and back, in addition to frequent alibis and cover-ups. Over time, Lane's professor of pastoral theology, Reverend Baxter Dickinson, grew suspicious of Lowry's absences and began to record them. Dickinson, a known pro-slavery man, had formed a bias against Lowry from the moment they had met, simply because he was John Rankin's son. Dickinson often reviewed the reports of the class monitor, who noted the comings and goings of students and knew when Lowry was gone. Sometimes he would quiz Lowry, who would say casually that he had been, quote, tending to important business that simply couldn't be postponed, end quote. Lowry knew that Dr. Stowe and his wife, Harriet Beecher, were both well aware of the work he was doing, and he was confident that, if necessary, the Stowes would make up an excuse for his behavior. At one point, Dickinson arranged for Lowry himself to be assigned to the post of class monitor. Dickinson handed Lowry the forms that every monitor used to chart the comings and goings of the students, but the following week, Lowry returned the forms without any absentees marked. Now, the professor looked at them and returned them to Lowry, saying, quote, "As Brother Rankin has done so well, not a student has presumed to be absent while he is a monitor. He will act for another week," end quote. At the end of the next week, Lowry, who was following in his father's rebellious footsteps in ways beyond his underground work, returned the sheets again without a mark. "How is this?" asked a stunned Dickinson. Turning to a student, he asked, "Were you not absent Sabbath morning?" "Yes," the student replied. Then, turning to Lowry, he said, "Why did you not mark him absent?" Lowry said, "For the reason that I was myself absent." "Were you absent from prayers also?" he asked. "I was not," Lowry said. "Were there no absentees?" he demanded. "I presume there were," Lowry said. "And you refused to mark their absences? Now, will you tell me, sir, why you refused to do your duty as a monitor?" the professor asked. We will return in less than 1 minute. Okay, we are back. We are picking up on page 119 of Beyond the River. I did not attempt to keep an account of the presence of the students at any of the exercises for these reasons, end quote, Lowry said. Quote, "I dislike very much to assume the position of watching the deportment of my fellows. To my way of thinking, it is espionage that it is not in keeping with Christian manliness. The second reason is that every member of the institution was supposed to be a Christian gentleman, and the very fact that they are here because they are looking forward to the ministry presupposes that their deportment would not dishonor so sacred a calling. I respectfully decline to have anything to do with the monitor system," end quote. Expecting a fight over the principle of the system, Lowry was surprised when weeks later, the faculty voted to dispense with student monitors, which gave Lowry the freedom to work on the Underground Railroad anytime he could in his hectic schedule. By then, in addition to his classes, he was working in a broom factory. The carpentry job had been given to another student for 45 cents a day, but he learned somehow to juggle his job, his studies, and the underground. Dickinson never did find the proof of his involvement, but he continued to watch Lowry's every move. Lowry, who operated alone out of Lane, though in conjunction with the Cincinnati Anti-Slavery Society and the Free Black community, was never certain whom he could trust at the school. Because of the recent mob activity, most people feared associating with anyone who was helping Blacks and especially assisting in the escape of slaves. Only a few students at Lane were openly avowed abolitionists. Lowry assumed that any number of people suspected and some even knew of the undercover operation he was running, such as Calvin Stowe, but he was never certain about Stowe until one night in the early months of 1837. Now, some free Blacks Lowry had on several occasions worked with sent a runaway slave to him early one evening. Lowry had no team of horses and he felt a fever coming on. Worse still, he knew that the temperatures outside were dropping. He could not hide the fugitive until he was well enough to travel, and in his near desperation about what to do, he confided in Professor Stowe. It was the first time he had said openly what he was doing, though he assumed that the Stowes, both close friends of his father's and frequent visitors to Ripley, had known all along. Quote, "Brother Rankin," end quote, Stowe said after hearing all of the dilemma, quote, "you ought not to be out in the night air. It is too damp for a man as unwell as you are. It is equally true that you cannot keep the poor fellow in safety this close to the city," end quote. Quote, "What can I do?" Lowry asked. Quote, but venture the going afoot. The risk would be less. I might not be disturbed so early tomorrow morning if I kept to the wood. The Miami River we will have to wade," end quote. Stowe replied, quote, "No, you must not do that. I see no other way out of the difficulty but for me to take my horse and carriage and go myself. And if you will give me specific directions as to the way, I will try and make the trip," end quote. Lowry went to bed with a raging fever and a sense of satisfaction, knowing now that Stowe could be trusted and could be depended upon if such an emergency ever again occurred. Stowe and the Black man hiding in Lowry's room set out for Butterworth's. For Stowe, he had never before done this. It was a challenge. In the early morning, Lowry awakened with a rush of anxiety about Stowe. From his window, he could see Stowe's barnyard, and so he slept fitfully, now and again jolting awake and looking out his window. At first light, he saw Stowe drive his carriage into the yard. His clothes were wet, as were the horse and the carriage. Lowry met him in the yard to brush down his horse for him. Quote, "If it had not been for the efficient assistance of your colored friend, Lane Seminary would have had one professor less today, young man," end quote, Stowe began. Quote, "Just think of you being the occasion of my death, and think how this community would be horrified when it learned a professor in Lane Theological Seminary was drowned while stealing niggers. Just think of the scandal you would have brought on me and the institution I represent. Do you think the city rabble would, in the present temper of the popular feeling, have left one of the seminary buildings standing? Well, I am glad I only got a good ducking. Also, that I got the fellow safely to your station," end quote. Each month, more fugitives would be sent Lowry's way. In his 2 years at Lane, he would assist at least 300 runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad, taking them to safe houses north of Cincinnati, to Lebanon, to Springboro, and sometimes east to his father's house at Ripley. Now and again, Stowe would ask him about operations and how they were going, but Lowry never called upon Stowe again to make a run. Operating alone was the best policy during his years at Lane. Lowry came to believe, though on many nights he longed for the security of an armed partner. Everyone in Cincinnati knew that the runaway slave traffic across the river was increasing and that the abolitionists were determined. And so the movement to stop them was escalating too. On that day in the autumn of 1836, when Rankin left Lowry at Lane, he had no idea that his son would be pulled into the local Underground Railroad. But considering his own ties to the Cincinnati network, he must have sensed it would happen. With the peace of mind that his oldest son was finally on the way to becoming a minister, Rankin continued his tour for several more months in Warren, Butler, Highland, and Preble counties. After several lectures in Hamilton County, a citizen of Springfield wrote, quote, "After hearing the addresses of Mr. Rankin, everyone seemed to think Who could mob such a man, and who could disturb a society formed to advance principles so noble and elevating in their nature and calculated to bless and save our nation? The fact was clearly seen that the community generally have incorrect views of anti-slavery principles, and that when they are clearly presented, they commend themselves to every man's conscience. It is manifest that the opposition of a community to those principles is generally to be attributed to want of correct information on the subject. End quote. During the second half of his tour, he delivered 63 lectures and formed 10 new anti-slavery societies before he had to return home because of extreme exhaustion, a severe cough, and congestion of the lungs. There were rumors throughout the border counties that Rankin was not expected to recover, though he was quoted in the Emancipator as saying, quote, "I am much pleased with my work. Were it not for the state of my family and congregation, I should be glad to pursue it until there should not be a slave in the land. I never grow weary of my theme. I dwell upon it day after day with increasing interest. It is universal benevolence to man. Every lecture is calculated to be better on one's own heart." End quote. He did recover, and his congregation hailed him as a hero. In the weeks after his homecoming, the church brought in 48 new members, and the Ripley Anti-Slavery Society welcomed 32 newcomers to its already burgeoning roster. Because of the newspaper coverage of his agency, his audience once again widened as it had 4 years before when Garrison first published his letters. At an upcoming anniversary of the American Anti-Slavery Society, he would be one of the principal speakers, and as Garrison wrote in the Liberator after the meeting, he was to us an object of special interest in consequence of his early labors in behalf of the oppressed, who among abolitionists had not yet read the letters of this excellent man. By the start of 1837, the number of anti-slavery societies in the state of Ohio was nearly 150, up from 120 the year before and 35 the year before that. Runaways were routinely moving through Ripley and other river towns, aided, if necessary, by black and white conductors of the Underground Railroad. Anti-slavery petitions inundated the offices of federal and state legislators, and Southern legislators pushed harder than ever before to stop the education of blacks, the loss of their, quote, property, and the mere discussion of their peculiar institution. Remember, everybody listening, they consider us black people's property. They still do. It's modern day slavery. Continuing, almost done now with page 122. We are in Beyond the River in chapter 12. On February 6, 1837, Senator John C. Calhoun delivered his impassioned, quote, speech on the reception of abolition petitions, end quote, just as the anti-slavery petitions to Congress, like a mighty flood of anger, had reached an unprecedented volume. The gag rule of May 1836, automatically tabled anti-slavery petitions to Congress without discussion. The rule meant that neither the House nor the Senate would ever act upon them, but it did not stem the flow of petitions. Instead, it stimulated the flood. More petitions with longer lists of names deluged the state legislators, the U.S. Senate, and the House. The session of Congress for 1834 to 1835 had received and rejected 34,000 citizens petitioning Congress on the subject of slavery. The session of 1835 to 36, 110,000, and the session of 1837 to 1838, 300,000. Among the petitioners were Rankin, William, and John B. Mahan, Gilliland, and each of their wives. In his speech, Calhoun said the following, and we end page 122 with what Calhoun said. "We of the South cannot surrender our institutions." Remember how the South thinks now, don't forget it. "We of the South cannot surrender our institutions. To maintain the existing relations between the two races inhabiting that section of the Union is indispensable to the peace and happiness of both. It cannot be subverted without drenching the country in blood and extirpating one or the other of the races. Be it good or bad, slavery has grown up with our society and institutions, and is so interwoven with them that to destroy it would be to destroy us as a people, they say." I'm saying that they say. Continuing. Bear with me one moment. Okay, back in action, you guys, real quick. So let's go ahead and finish this thinking here. So I'm going to continue where we're on page 122 of Beyond the River, and I'm going to pick up, and it says, or Calhoun continues to say, but let me not be understood as admitting, even by implication, that the existing relations between the two races in the slaveholding states is an evil. Far otherwise, I hold it to be a good, as it has thus far proved itself to be to both, and will continue to prove so if not disturbed by the fell spirit of abolition. I appeal to facts. Never before has the Black race of Central Africa, from the dawn of history to the present day, attained a condition so civilized and so improved, not only physically, but morally and intellectually. It came among us in a low, degraded, and savage condition, and in the course of a few generations, it has grown up under the fostering care of our institutions, reviled as, or revealed as they have been, to its present comparatively civilized condition. This, with the rapid increase of numbers, is conclusive proof of the general happiness of the race, in spite of all the exaggerated tales to the contrary. Now, I shall say to Calhoun, who wrote that speech, F you, Calhoun. F you, Calhoun. Now, let me put this on the record. Us Black people are not animals, nor are we savages, nor did we not come from culture. We were kidnapped from our homeland of Africa, which is the main base homeland of everybody. Know your history, but I'm talking about Black people today. Let's keep it on the map for what it is. We have culture, always have had culture, but in 1610, we were kidnapped. We were sold. We were not only kidnapped, we were not only were our own people manipulated into selling us to the Europeans, but we were bought and swapped out for guns and ammunitions because of what was going on in Africa at the time between us Black folks with other Black folks. What was happening? A lot of Black folks in that time that were ignorant in that time, to make a long story short, in Africa, okay? They decided the only way that we can win against each other, which was all wrong from the beginning, but the way we can win against each other is we need the armament like the Europeans. Well, the Europeans said, well, let's play on them. We're going to go to Africa. We're going to offer them these guns and weapons because they only have bow and arrow. We're going to offer them these weapons and they're going to take it. But in exchange, we want one thing. We want your prisoners of war. We want your Black people. We want the Black people that for you are prisoners of war. But they had no idea that the prisoners of war would then be put on a boat and swapped out into slavery into the United States. And generations later, we will be saying, why were we taken? Why were we taken from our country of Africa? We will be asking the same question again. We know why. Because of capitalism, because of the need for the United States to build, but they needed laborers, they needed folks in order to build this country. Britain, England, all of those places were not built they didn't just come up by themselves. They were built on the labor of Black people. They were built on the back of Black people. We were kidnapped and sold all at the same time. And we were sold by our own Black people as well. Not only were we sold through the transatlantic, we were sold through our own Black people. It's a very hard pill to swallow for some Black folks, but the truth is factual and the facts is truth. And that's just what it is. We were sold by our own Black people in exchange for weapons, not knowing ourselves as Black people in Africa at that time in the early 1600s, that our bodies, our Black bodies, will then be put onto the ship and then shipped overseas through the transatlantic and sold to every different island in every space where the white man can get his hand onto something, and where the Brazilian man can use us as slaves, where the Spaniards can use us as slaves, and where the white Europeans can screw our women and impregnate our women and all this mixed culture and blase, which is all good with me. I have mixed children. I'm okay with mixed culture. Okay. Remember that a lot of times, and I do say this bluntly because I do believe in what I am saying, people of color usually don't have a problem with white people. white people have had a problem with people of color. And I stand by that until the day that I die. We do not have a problem with people. We are loving folks. Most brown people are loving people, from Native Americans to Asians to Indians. We're loving people. If you love us, we'll love you. But for generations and generations and generations, white Europeans have wanted to hold on to this white supremacy. Why? Because of their fear of their inferiority, of their skin being diminished, that the white man, the white race will be diminished if people continue to mix up. And this is the fear behind white supremacy. I wrote an essay on this. If you guys want to check it out, okay, you can go to my Facebook page and look up PJ Gallegos, and you will see that I have an essay on this, okay? The fear of white supremacy, the fear beneath white supremacy. It is a very good essay. It's $1 to buy. If you want to support my work, you can go check it out. I believe I have a link inside the bio. But otherwise than that, it's very direct. And I'm telling you guys now, this is modern day slavery, and it's deep, it's hardcore, and they're coming for it, they're gutting for it. And I don't believe in people hating each other. I don't believe in people fighting each other. And I believe that even if this country was an all-black country, we would still have problems within each other. So I believe it's a human thing. I believe it's a humanity thing. And the human part of it has been erased for a very long time, ever since 1610, ever since we were being sold as slaves, even through world slavery across the country, across the globe. It is a national thing. Slavery has not only happened to black people. Slavery has originated really and technically in Rome with their prisoners of war. That's where it goes back to BC time. If you didn't know, learn your history. It goes back to BC time. Okay, so this is not brand new. Black people weren't the first slaves that there were. In our country of Africa, we were not slaves to our own people. We had culture. We had a whole bunch of things going on. We had culture. We had love. We had dances. We had rituals. We had religion. And that was stripped away from us. And our own people, out of ignorance, did not know that this is what the Europeans had in mind to do with our black bodies. So I appreciate you all listening. I appreciate you all taking the time to jump into this live. This is probably one of the longest lives that I've ever had. The next time we go into Beyond the River again, hopefully I can go in chapter 13 with you all here in a live. Because usually when I'm reading books, I'm not recording them, of course, at the same time. I decided to do this today this way because there's a lot of folks who tend to, unfortunately, make up excuses on why they cannot read a book, even though they have kids and other things to do. There's always time. You can find a way. And I just wanted to show you all that there is a way. If there's a will, there is a way. Thank you all for being here. Subscribe if you wish to do so. Put a like to this video if you choose to do so. And I will talk to you all soon on the next video. Keep the peace, eliminate the hatred, and we shall talk soon. Blessings, everyone. I'm out.